So it's been one of those weeks where we have mixed emotions. And I'll begin with juxtaposing two events that occurred this week. Begin with the first yesterday. You might be aware that the president of the Palestinian Authority was visiting in Germany with Chancellor Scholz yesterday, and there was a press conference. And one of the reporters actually had the guts to ask him a very pertinent question. You might remember that it is now the 50th anniversary since the massacre in Munich, where 11 Olympic Israeli athletes were murdered by terrorists. 50 years. So this news reporter asked him, and you can hear him asking, and of course, it's being translated, is he going to make a statement expressing grief or empathy for that event? And he did quite the opposite. He went on to condemn Israel for 50 Holocausts, I quote, that Israel has executed and elaborated on it. Now, the talking that's going on today is that people felt that either Scholz was in shock, but he did not respond then. And in fact, when he concluded, shook his hand. He then later on went on to make a comment in the newspaper, perhaps on the radio. Then there are those who, like Lapid, our prime minister, condemned what he did, but it left quite, perhaps not a surprising feeling, but certainly not a pleasant one. And hurtful that that's the way Germany appeared in listening to that, because it goes counter to the relationship that's been being built. So now, on the other end, this week, Israel marathon team in the European athletics in Munich took home the gold, which means that they stood at the podium and sang Tikvah. So just to juxtapose both of those. Second item. We, in the last number of days, have lost two wonderful artists. One the world knows, Olivia Newton-John, and I liked so much how John Travolta expressed the loss, that she really improved the world. And there was something about her, and many musicians, but there was something about her that did that. And I'm sure we all know her, Zichrona Livracha. And on Sunday, the first and the ultimate Israeli pop singer, Tzvika Pick, died at the age of 72. And in fact, the prime minister stopped a security meeting to inform the ministers of his death. He began a certain musical culture in this country. On Monday, the day that he was being buried, I was in Machane Yehuda, and there was somebody who was standing there, as is accustomed. People sing, looking for a shekel. somebody who was singing Tzvika Pick songs. And he had a wonderful voice, almost sounded like Tzvika Pick. But what caught me were the people who would stop, and you could see and hear them mouthing and singing the songs, because these are songs that have been such a part of Israeli society. So, Zichrono Livracha. Third of the four little anecdotes today. Ephraim Rimmel lost his wife and infant daughter in a car accident in 2019. He was left paralyzed in his lower body, is in a wheelchair. Ayelet Coleman lost her husband, who was murdered in 2018 in a terrorist attack. Earlier this week, they sat under the chuppah because she wanted to be by her new husband's side, and they wed. And they now have a blended family, each of them coming with 4 children. And the families of both deceased spouses were present. So life brings its blessings after its curses, and goes on. I'm sure you could look it up to see the simcha. And lastly, and it really can lead us into our topic today. Current in the news this week, and for a while, is Chok Hemshechiyut, which means the continuity bill. This is a revolutionary bill stating that parents of an IDF fallen soldier will be able to have a child from his seed. In other words, grandparents become grandparents, unless the soldier beforehand left explicit instructions that he was not interested in this. So that is being discussed now. What are the considerations? And you might have a thought about this. They want a part of their son with them, to give somebody a hug. There are other issues, though, that are being expressed. Is this baby going to be just a remembrance of his father that he will never know? Because the mother will not be a relative of the father. And so this kind of issue is being discussed. Now, how does it lead us into today's subject, adulthood?
What's that?
Would you like some coffee?
It's being discussed that if they come up with a form that an 18-year-old Chayal soldier will fill out as he begins his service, how can an 18-year-old know what he wants in that area of life? And should he have to acknowledge on paper, even if he knows it in his heart and head, that there's a chance that he won't come back? An 18-year-old is only a few years older than the adolescent that we discussed last week. So that's the kind of week and the issues that's been on my mind. I want to tell you, though, that we spent a wonderful Shabbat Bachi and I hosted the entire Kavari family from Friday night to Saturday night. They slept over and it was wonderful. And Tibby is considering, no, I won't finish that sentence. Okay, anyway. One of our classmates expressed a bit of concern and anxiety even when reading the ad, the promo for this series, wondering about the last session, old age. And we can all imagine that it's a sobering subject. But actually, I am going to suggest that it is this age, adulthood, that may be the cause for nervousness. Now, does that sound strange to you? Why? And please think and share a response. Why would I suggest that? That adulthood, from young adulthood to middle age, why might that be cause for an individual to feel nervous? I'm going to give you a moment to think because I'd like you to come up with some possibilities, please.
The feeling of responsibility and
I'm hearing two people at the same time, please. Okay, somebody want to?
I'm wondering about the responsibility of an adult parent about their children, how they're doing, how they'll manage. So that can cause anxiety.
Okay, for sure. An adult can, even though somebody in old age can also still be concerned about their children. But for sure, that's an item if you feel you are still responsible in many ways for a child, yes, that would cause nervousness, a healthy nervousness. Thank you, Esther. Anyone else? Nobody remembers being nervous as an adult? No?
How about health issues?
Interesting.
The only thing that I remember, I guess the main worry is when my kids were young, is I was wanting to make sure I was there to help them grow up. And whereas once I'm in my age now, actually it's the grandchildren. The kids are all grown up, it's the grandchildren. So, but they're under the care of their parents. So I would say for me, it was just, the worry that God forbid something happened to me, I wouldn't be there to help the kids grow up. And I took that very seriously as the father.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that I was, anxious almost all my adulthood, again, concerned about the kids, the growing up and, illnesses that they may have. And, again, there was a lot of responsibility with your kids.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Also politically, the way the crazy world is today, parents worry about the future of their kids.
To take another tack, Bracha.
Yes. Brenda?
Yeah, I was going to say it's good that people are focused on their kids, but I would say that adulthood is a time that can be grand anxiety because you're not a child. You're expected to take responsibility. You're responsible for yourself. You may be responsible for as you reach a certain age, you're caught between kids and parents. You're supposed to know who you are, but you may not know who you are. I can see that as quite anxiety provoking. And just that sense of I'm responsible for myself and I've made these decisions, and were they the right decisions to make?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. Let's move on. I'm going to share my screen and look at a verse that we'll all be familiar with. Just a second. Just. Got it. Okay. So, from Parshat Chaye Sarah. Now, as I'm wont to do, and love doing, in fact, let's read this pasuk very carefully. And the life of Sarah was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Now, how old was she when she died?
127.
127. So the question is, why the word years appears after each digit? Why? That's a strange way of saying somebody's age, dividing it that way. Anybody want to venture
There
a guess?
were different periods of her life. So they want to distinguish the difference, what happened the first and then after, because they were very, very.
Okay, all right. So Rashi, one of our favorite Parshanim commentators, suggests that, yes, each digit is meant to be acknowledged individually, as all are equally important, which we stated in our first class when talking about a lifespan, and all were equally good. We are being told here that Sarah maintained her stunning beauty, intuitive wisdom, and sinless innocence throughout her life. Educator David Foreman asks, what makes for an extraordinary life? And I'm sharing that question with you. And what comes to your mind immediately? What makes for an extraordinary life? And there are no right or wrong answers, but there must be something, even if it's one word that came into your mind when I just asked that question.
Can I
Anybody?
share mine? Purpose.
That you have a purpose. Okay, thank you, Elliot.
Overcoming problems, solving problems.
Okay, Beth.
Relationships.
What about relationships?
Well,
That you have them?
the
That they're
relationships that you have, throughout your life.
okay. Okay, Marlene? Anyone else?
Giving to others.
No stage is completely.
Being a giving person, yes?
No stage is completely removed from the stage before. I think we carry with us, we develop, we evolve, but we don't completely share down the parts that we carry with us from childhood.
Okay. Everybody agree with that? Anybody disagree with what Esther just said? Rabbi Foreman shares in our next text Rav Soloveitchik's thoughts on this issue. And he asks, is Sarah's age and the way it's expressed perhaps a metaphor for life? Foreman says, I heard an idea a long time ago quoted in the name of Rabbi Soloveitchik. Well, you can say that there are two different ways of going through the stages of life. You can almost divide people into two kinds of people. One way is to pass through them, to go through stage A, and after you go through stage A, you leave stage A behind and enter stage B. As you go from stage B to stage C, you leave stage B behind. So you go to stage C. That's the ordinary way to go through life. But there's an extraordinary way to go through life, the way Sarah did it. You take each stage with you and you build. But as you go toward 20, you don't exchange that innocence for a new stage in life. You keep that innocence and that exuberance, that curiosity, and you build on it. As you become an adult, you grow wise. As you accumulate life experience, you don't leave behind being a child. You bring the innocence, the exuberance, the curiosity of childhood along with you and integrate that into your life experience. As you go to later stages of your life, as you ask yourself, what's the impact that I am going to leave on the world? What's the impact that I am going to leave on the world? Instead of becoming obsessed with that question, you bring the innocence, the exuberance, the curiosity of childhood along with you. You bring the wisdom, the life experience, the definitions of principles that come from how am I going to educate my kids, the questions that preoccupied me in my 30s, you bring that with you. As you begin to embrace the questions of what impact I am going to have on the world, my midlife crisis, I fuse it all together. Now, that question, what impact am I going to have on my family, my community, my nation, the world, our world? Now, if adulthood is the time we ask this overwhelming question, and it should be the time, I'd say that that can easily evoke a nervousness that when one reaches old age, they should not have to be thinking about what they're still going to do. That it's time to not stop growing, not stop learning, not stop relating, not stop caring, but you deserve to be able to sit back. And hopefully you've achieved. But you can't wait till old age to start thinking about what it is you're looking for. As Eliot said, what your purpose is. Whatever that purpose is. I mentioned Rabbi, doctor, psychiatrist Abraham Twersky last week, who died 2 years ago in Jerusalem. And he tells the following about his great-grandfather. My great-grandfather, the first Rebbe of Bavo, was sitting with a group of Hasidim when someone mentioned that it was a special day deserving of a l'chaim. But who would volunteer to go get the liquor? The Rebbe said, give me the money, I will send my boy. He took the money and left, returning a bit later with the mashke, the drink. It was evident that he had gone for it himself. I love this. The Hasidim felt very guilty. You said you would send your boy, they said. The Rebbe said, I did. When I grew older, I decided I would take my youth with me and not grow old. So I did send my boy.
Love it.
Perfect story for our point. There's no denying how precious youth is. The potential of youth is endless. That's how we have to see it and how they should see it.
Can I
Yes,
ask
hold
a
on
question?
let me please finish my point, Elliot. Yes, hold on to the curiosity, the wonder, and the exuberance, the energy that typifies our young. But together with that, I'd like us to look at what does being an adult mean. And we're going to look at a few texts that we'll read, and I'll ask you to see which one or which two, which three resonates with you most. Elliot, your
Yes, I have
question.
a question, please. This is phenomenal. I like the idea of this kind of holistic approach and forever being curious and growing from the past to create a better future and maybe future. But as I think about all of this, it certainly is profound and very thought-provoking. I wonder, in the case of, let's say, someone who loses his mate, later on, in phase 2, marries a different mate who has a totally different personality. Can you grow from the past into the present? Maybe there should not be comparisons made. I don't know. Or maybe this comparison of mate 1 and mate 2 do not apply.
Elliot, based on what you've said a few times in the class, perhaps this is a very relevant topic to you. And I wish you an interesting and enjoyable way without me being too presumptuous. But I think that definitely can happen, even though it might be very interesting how you would be with one type of person and then choose somebody very different. But that can happen. And I'm sure that makes for something very interesting and perhaps exciting. But there's no doubt in my mind that you would, yes, bring from the first experience things that are with you. You might begin to see those things a little differently, but you can't deny parts of your past. You might want to correct certain things that are wrong, but if you lose a mate, a partner, that's not something that's wrong. I mean, it's sad, you know what I mean? Anyway, but yes, you are to bring that, but not for the sake of comparison. It's just going to be a part of you,
But,
I would suggest.
but Hannah, even if it's not a second mate, you grow up in a certain home with certain ways, you marry somebody with different ideas and different values, and you try to merge the two and do the best of it. Doesn't mean you have to get rid of what you had before. You just kind of amalgamate the two. So
This is true, that even if it's just a first, there are parts from your past that you'll want to bring with you. You might have to do some negotiating. Absolutely. So I want you to look at these next texts, 3 or 4, and see how you relate to them. So this is taken from Vinita Dara Nanjia, The Times of India. I have a good time when I'm looking for different sources. And she says, here are a few interesting definitions of maturity from here and there. Maturity is not when we start speaking big things. It is when we start understanding small things. Someone else. I used to walk into a room full of people and wonder if they liked me. Now I look around and wonder if I like them. Maturity comes when you stop making excuses and start making changes. This reminds me, I had the good fortune to turn on the TV a couple of days ago, and just starting was that magnificent movie on Golden Pond. You remember it? With Katharine Hepburn, Henry Fonda, and Jane Fonda. And Jane Fonda plays Henry's daughter in the movie as well. And she's got a chip on her shoulder, even though her father is 80 and he's beginning to lose it. But she comes to visit, and it's obvious, though she's a grown woman, that she is still living with things from her childhood. And you'll remember the very stirring scene with Katharine Hepburn, and I believe this was her last movie. She says to her grown-up daughter, "How long are you going to go on blaming your father? She literally says, you're a big girl now." Taking total responsibility for your actions is something that people don't, even when they're older, want to do. And I think one of the most serious ethical challenges of our age is denial of personal responsibility. We'll get back to the Indian news. Our society seems filled with individuals who are eager to blame their actions on others, their parents, peers, income level, their race, their religious upbringing, etc., but not take their own responsibility. Getting back to the text.
I like the last statement very much.
Maturity is the capacity to endure uncertainty. Maturity begins when we are content to feel we're right about something without feeling the necessity to prove someone else is wrong. Now, even within this one text, there might be a line that you think says it all. If anybody would like to comment.
I like the last statement the best, because if you reach the stage that in order to feel good, you don't have to prove that someone else is wrong. I think to me, it's a question of insecurity. I feel better if I can put somebody else's down. So if you can live with yourself and be comfortable in your own skin, you don't have that need. To me, that's kind of maturity.
So it says something about you and where you're at. Anybody else?
Bracha, I think that, we all have learned that living with uncertainty is sort of part of our everyday lives for the last few years, even more so than it might have been before. And I think it takes a lot of strength to live with that.
Yep.
And
yes, Merle. For sure. For sure. Okay. So now let's go on to the second text. And this is also from a therapist. Dr. Robert Firestone says, people who are emotionally mature do not have, and he's echoing what we just read, defensive or angry reactions to feedback, a little different. They do not offhandedly disagree with negative commentary. Instead, they are open to exploring new ideas, welcome constructive criticism, and in this way, they expand their self-knowledge and self-awareness. Until my dying day, there's something for me to learn from others, and I am open to listening, something we have said on many occasions. Adults seek self-knowledge to know themselves and develop an accurate self-concept. They are aware of both the positive and negative aspects of their personalities and have a realistic perspective of themselves in relation to others. In their pursuit of self-knowledge, they are aware of unconscious motivation, open to the analysis of that dimension of mental life, and attempt to integrate it to the best of their ability. So adding a bit to what we read just now.
Also, I think the two words are the most important: constructive criticism.
Yeah, well, nobody should have to listen to criticism that is not constructive.
Yeah, but people who are anxious to learn welcome constructive criticism.
Well, that's what he's saying. Somebody who is mature will be able to and will welcome. You know, the story of one of the sages who loses his partner. And his students feel so badly for him that they bring another rabbi to be his chevruta, his study partner. And after their first session together, the rabbi, who's still grieving the loss of his friend over so many years, says to his students, "What did you bring me?" He's a nice guy, but all he does is say yes to every point that I make. The partner that I lost, what made us a great team is that we question each other and inspire each other to think. And that's what we're meant to do. Okay, the third text by our Rav Twersky. Awareness of the great abilities of the human mind is a proof, it says a proof, amongst others, that the goal of the human being is not sensual gratification. The fact that we have minds that can grasp spiritual concepts, philosophy, science, is an indication that we were created for something much different than just satisfying our biological drives. Growth is a feature of humanity. We are meant to go from mochin de katnut, juvenile thinking, to mochin de gadlut, mature thinking. Some translate those two terms slightly differently. The juvenile thinking is also called constricted consciousness. What makes it constricted? We don't see a big picture, a broader context. That's not how we live our life. We don't have a fuller vision. And that impacts on our decisions, big and small, and our actions. And the mature thinker has an expanded consciousness. Gadlut from gadol, katnut from katan. And when you're mature, you are able and you are meant to see the bigger picture, which sometimes is frightening. And we see it as we contemplate and experience. Now, I have shared, if not this year, previously, the following midrash. And this speaks to the issue of us realizing that we are constantly meant to grow. As human beings, we are not static. And that's what maturity is. to keep growing and realizing the need for it and the need to also be flexible. Now, why do I throw out that word flexible? Meaning that maybe when you were 30, you thought with blinders, and this is the way something has to be. Perhaps the older you get, not that you give up on certain values, but you see that maybe at this moment, there's a need to be a little different, to do something a little differently. So the Midrash is the following. When Moshe ascended on high to receive the Torah, the ministering angels said before the Holy One, "Blessed be he, master of the world. What is someone born of a woman doing among us?" And God said to them, "He has come to receive the Torah." And they said before him, "This coveted treasure, you intend to give it to flesh and blood? What is a mortal that you should remember him, or the Son of Man that you should recall him?" Said the Holy One, blessed be he, to Moshe, "Give them an answer." Moshe said before him, "Master of the world, the Torah that you are giving me, what is written in it? I am the Lord your God, who has taken you out of the land of Egypt." So Moshe said to the Malachim, to the angels, "Did you descend to Egypt? Were you enslaved to Paro? Why should the Torah be yours? What else is written here? There shall not be unto you the gods of others. Do you angels live among nations who worship idols? What else is written there? Remember the Shabbat day to sanctify it. Do you angels engage in labor from which you need to rest? Honor your father and mother. Do you have a father or mother, angel? You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. Is there envy among you? Is there an evil inclination among you?" Immediately, the angels conceded to the Holy One, "Blessed be he." That's what life is all about. And if we're mentioning, just as an aside, Moshe, think of how Moshe began way back and told God, "I'm not a man of words." That's all he evolved into. Okay, so the last text. Al tikri banayich ela bonayich. Call them not your children, but your builders. What is this text doing here when I'm asking you, what does it mean to be an adult? Anyone? When did the Israelites become adults? Constantly complaining in the desert? When was the one time that they did not complain with each other? Was when Moshe gave them the responsibility of building the Mishkan. They no longer were meant to be dependent totally on God or even Moshe. I should have said that the other way around. That is maturity. When you are not overly dependent, because we all are dependent on whether it's somebody else or God, but we are the ones to be in control as much as we can be. Now, there are terms that we've used, and we could make a list. But before I do, suggest words that are integral to being an adult. Would anybody like to share which of these texts speaks to you the most, or whatever? Anyone?
To me, not so much the text as your statement about the Mishkan, because the idea that each one of us feels needed and responsible for doing, the fact that he included the whole nation into building the Mishkan is a tremendous idea.
For sure, for sure. Anyone? Anything capture for you what it is to be an adult in any of these texts?
Well, the
Or go ahead.
responsibility.
For sure. That is a major topic. And I will just throw out to you words and see if you want to add to the list, words that I think that we've mentioned, or perhaps a few that we haven't quite yet, before we go on to our next text. Independence, being self-sufficient, being rational, having to make solid decisions, having to be employed, house upkeep, paying the bills, said flexibility, being more realistic, learning from the experience of others and your own experience, planning for the future, having coping skills. And maybe this becomes a little more difficult the older we get, to be open-minded and receptive to change, but it can happen. Anybody want to add to that list?
Belief that one can deal with unforeseen circumstances, and one had the knowledge, the insights, and it can step back and kind of try to be objective, and maybe accepting the fact that there may be interpersonal conflicts with others along the way, those folks who are less mature, so to speak.
In your eyes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, absolutely. Coping skills. Coping skills. Thank you, Elliot. Anyone else?
As you said earlier, flexibility.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay.
I would,
right.
I would say knowing what you can change and what you can't change.
Absolutely, Stan. For sure. For sure. Somebody else? Okay.
Bracha,
Marlene.
I'm really taken with the last statement about call them not your children, but your builders.
Now, I'm sorry, Marlene. Yeah. And I'm sure you picked up on this as being a Hebrew student, that in the Hebrew, it's from the same shorish, because ben, your child, and it's from the same romish as boneh, builder. All right?
Correct.
Go on, Marlene.
Because I think that one of the signs of being mature is to be open-minded and willing to change, and to be able to look at new ideas. And who do we get new ideas from? Mostly not from the people who have gone ahead of us, but the people who are coming up behind us. I very often have this conversation with my granddaughter. Oh my goodness. We're having a lovely thunderstorm right now.
Uh-huh.
I often have the conversation with my granddaughter, I will often say to her that I love her, but one of the things that I love most about her is that she asks me the most interesting questions and makes me think.
How old is she?
She is 10, but she's been doing this forever.
Uh-huh.
The bracha is in the Torah.
For sure, Marlene. I mean, and that's part of parenting, encouraging, because children, those who are uninhibited, and that typifies being a child, will ask and reflect their curiosity. Absolutely. And to be a parent who encourage, or a grandparent who encourages that, absolutely. I see, Shari, your hand is up.
Yeah, this discussion really makes me think about the role of dementia in adulthood.
Yes.
My father just passed away in April, and he had severe dementia, and he was fiercely independent his whole life. Like, he didn't accept help. He despite all his physical ailments, he found a way to do things. And I really felt, once he started to decline, I had to become his builder, but not only building in terms of helping him navigate, the healthcare system and being his power of attorney for personal care. But I got so close to him because, I was independent, he was independent. We did our own thing. But once he was dependent on his children, and I saw, going through all his paperwork, all his achievements in life and everything he's done, like I got so close to him those last 4 years of his life. And not only, did I help him build his life at the end, but I'm building his legacy.
Beautifully said. And you're confirming, building on what Marlene just said about the children being the builders. Thank you for sharing that. And may you cherish your memories.
Often not only
Thank
from
you.
your children, but as a teacher, from your students. I personally,
Absolutely.
I've learned a lot from my students. And not
Mikol Milamdai Iskalti. That's from Pirkei Avot, that we learn from everyone something. Okay, I want to move on because it's clear that within adulthood, there are different stages, and at different times in adulthood, there are different priorities. And Rabbi Ed Feinstein, that I studied with a couple of summers at the Hartman Institute, says this beautifully in this a little lengthier text. In early adulthood, we define ourselves by the work we do and the rewards we earn. At this moment in life, in early adulthood, work is more than an economic necessity, a means of support. Work is an expression of self. I can see that. I've been preparing myself for this, and I define myself that way. Work is testimony of our capacity to affect the world. In the Talmud, the development of the human being doesn't stop with the end of childhood. Grown-ups are meant to keep on growing. What counts as success at 25 isn't the same as what counts as success at 45. According to the story in Genesis, as a young man, Yosef dreamed, we'll remember this, that his father and mother and brothers would all bow themselves down before him. He dreamed that the stars and the moon and all the planets would circle him in adoration. By 40, he had achieved in the world all that he had dreamt. The grand ruler of all Egypt, master of all its wealth, all the world came and bowed before him. But it wasn't enough for him, Joseph. That's not what he wanted anymore. In one of the Torah's most moving scenes, Joseph's brothers arrive in Egypt and appear before him, the same brothers who tried to kill him 20 years earlier. He has this choice: to ignore them, to dismiss them, to incarcerate and torture and exact his revenge upon them. Instead, he opens himself to them. They bow down to him, but he raises them up and cries out, Ani Yosef Achicha. I am Joseph, your brother. He needs them. He needs connection with them, and he knows it. In Jewish tradition, the age of 13 is the beginning of adulthood, but the age of 40 is the beginning of spiritual maturity. At 40, I finally understood self-sufficiency is not the goal of life. To be fully self-possessed is not the ultimate source of human dignity. Connection is what matters. What is Bina? What do we understand at 40? That it's not about me anymore. It does not compromise my dignity to recognizing that I need help, that I need others, that my own importance is measured not by the world that bows down to me, but by the larger purposes I serve. And what of 50 and beyond? What is Eitzah, counseling, Zikna, aging, and Seva, seniority? It means becoming an elder who earns eternity by teaching, by mentoring, by leading. Putting your name on an office tower will not earn you immortality, but planting your wisdom in the soul of a child will. Because when it comes to anything of real value in life, you can't keep what you don't give away. Now, this all sounds very serious, but is it sobering? Author and radio host, moralist Dennis Prager strongly asserts that an adult is morally obligated to aspire to and work on happiness. And he says, it is not a selfish and frivolous concern. Now, why does Prager believe that happiness is so integral to being an adult and so important, and goes to the point of saying it's a moral obligation? Why is happiness so important?
It must be a connection, correlation between happiness and longevity. And if longevity means life and we are obligated to preserve life, it would all seem to fit together.
Okay, for sure that, you have less stress, and for sure, but any other reason that you can think of why as an adult? Zipporah?
I'm just thinking, if a person is happy and satisfied, they have more to give to the rest of the world that's around them.
You create absolutely an atmosphere in your home and wherever you are that is good for yourself and for others.
I think it's also consideration for the younger generation. If you show your kids that you're okay and you're happy, you're less of a burden and concern to them.
Okay, well, that's what I mean. And Sipporah means when we say for those around you and who you're responsible for and in your home. But
you also don't take whatever you have with you. So you might as well enjoy it now.
But this happiness and attaining it is not an easy endeavor, because we could take the time, but we're not going to say which of these traits is the most difficult to attain, the easiest. But why isn't it easy? Because human nature is insatiable, and one tends as well to want to avoid pain. We want immediate gratification and we want to avoid pain. And he says that's a misconception to think that if you want to be happy, you should distance yourself from situations that while leading to happiness also involve pain. And he claims that many people don't mature enough to be able to really get involved in situations that could ultimately give him or her happiness because they're not willing to endure the pain. Think of everything good. You have to work at it. And it sometimes does cause pain. And it's only a mature person who knows that, We close with what Prager says, trying to live free of pain assures an unhappy life. Tension is necessary to all growth. A life without tension is a shallow life. So shallow that an absence of tension characterizes animal or plant life more than it does human life. If you have tension in your life, it means that you face competing demands, a characteristic of a full life, not an unhappy one. And he distinguishes between necessary tension versus unnecessary tension. And which is the one that is healthy? The necessary tension. How do you know if it's healthy? By asking yourself the following question. Are you growing through the experiencing of this tension? Because if not, then it's just an unhealthy aggravation and an unhealthy stress. And we are reminded of this from our Tehillim. Hazorim b'dima b'rina yik tzoru. Those who sow in tears will reap in joy. And that is what we have to say about adulthood, unless anyone else would like to say something else.
Can I make a quick comment? It seems to me, Bracha, you talk about tension and joy, tears and joy, etc. There has to be some sort of internal evaluation or judgment process that determines whether someone reacts to whatever it is and cries or is joyful. So there's an evaluation process that's going on. Maybe we have to learn to evaluate differently, and maybe that goes back to one's self-concept. In other words, why would somebody cry? Is it reflexive, or is there an evaluation that goes on? Why would someone respond to someone as though it's happy for them? There must be an evaluation process that goes on.
On whose part? On the person
part of the person experiencing the tears, the person who cries or responds with joy. Is there not a judgmental process that goes along? What's joyful to one may not be joyful to another.
Oh, for that, sure. We're just using the word happiness, but that might be one thing for you. And it might be something different for the people you're meeting now. I don't want to be too, so it's not a matter of judging. We're obviously differentiating between personal happiness and somebody who finds happiness with something that is wrong. And there are certain standards that society has. Stephen, I see your hand.
Waiting in the parking lot of Costco for the rain. Anyway, Elliot almost hit on it by using the word tension. Now, I know more people over 100, unfortunately, most of them, only one is here right now, and people like our lovely Esther here that are in their 90s. I don't want to reveal any ages. And I can tell you the secret from every one of them, every person I've ever met in life, You can't have this true happiness and contentment with this tension. The first necessary thing one must do is to remove as much as possible stress. Any stress, the amount of stress in one's life is inversely related to the degree of true contentment and happiness.
Well, absolutely. And Prager, that's why he differentiates between necessary tension, a tension that is good for you, and unnecessary tension, which would be the stress you're describing. He also points to the fact that if we didn't have certain tensions, a lot of inventions wouldn't have come about. Did I just silence everybody? Okay,
Positive stress and negative stress. I mean.
absolutely.
Also, going back to judgment, I have a problem with that in relation to your class. I judge your class as being so superb that when I compare it with others, I feel I'm down. So keep up the marvelous work. You really stimulate the thought process. Sei gesund.
Okay, I think that's a good note on which to end. Thank you, Elliot. Okay, all right. So next week, we look forward to old age.